Welcome to the second edition of Grace and Tommy talking Carolina Keys in the NCAA Tournament. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Grace Nugent. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Check out the local businesses for all your needs. Carolina gear, small business needs with Congruity. Grace, I felt like when we did this show last week, it was a little bit of, what we thought all season combined into one preview podcast for a regional. But when I look back at it and I think about what we talked about last week, we kind of nailed it on what Carolina needed to do to have success in their regional. Your overall thoughts on what you saw this weekend?
I think that when I watched the games, we were just proved right. Not to toot our own horns, but a little bit we were proved correct. I think that the biggest thing to come out of this regional for Scott Forbes and his team is just how tough they played. They played the last game to 30 outs. It was just the sounds and the environment and the Bosch magic, as they call it. It was everything you could want in a regional. And that last pseudo series against LSU, especially that last game, that was just a peak college baseball game. And they fought until the last out in every single game. And I think that is the biggest kind of positive takeaway from the regional. And UNC did a ton of things well. That's why they won. But I think it's also exposed a lot of things they need to work on. Am looking forward to the suit this upcoming weekend, and then if they want to look even further than that.
So when you look at the last game especially, and I think it's cool how they had you guys in the press row on the concourse, because I tell everybody that listen, the press box is so sanitary, you can't really get the vibe there. So being in the audience, to your point, Forbes has told us all year on this show, he's talked about how his guys played 27 outs. Well, they certainly played 27 and 30 outs, being the away team, which I still find is ridiculous. But I'm going to correct something I said, or not correct it, but we'll call it correcting. I said Carolina needed a dynamic third baseman, and I want to start with Gavin Gallaher. That guy played as good a third base in the Super Regional, especially against LSU, especially against Tommy White specifically. He answered all the questions that I've had about him on defense and about that position for Carolina on defense. And not only that, he hits the walk-off grand slam in the first game. Just a fantastic performance from a freshman on the biggest stage, Grace.
I think his performance was, if I could give out Grace's gold stars for the weekend, Gavin would get one. There's a reason that all of the media there voted him the most outstanding player of the tournament, because he earned it. And Tommy White is going to see Gavin in his nightmares, probably. It's like every ball he hit, Gavin got it. And not just Gavin, but the entire that bottom of the lineup, the guys that you might overlook a little bit in Gavin, Colby Wilkerson, and Alex Madera, the three of them really, they all stepped up. The top of the lineup went through their ups and downs across the weekend. And those three guys, and Anthony D'Onofrio, who's hitting like 600 right now, they just really stepped up and did what was necessary. Very much the kind of next man up mentality, which Alex talked about in the post game after the final LSU win, is as soon as he tried to get that bunt down, and that he ended up striking out on with the 2-strike bunt rule in the 9th. And he was like, wow, I just gave my team an out and we had Gavin in scoring position. He said he came back into the dugout and everyone's like, Colby's got you. Colby's got you. Colby did in fact get him. Colby hit the hit to score the tying run. But I just think especially the bottom of that lineup, Gavin especially, they all showed out. And Alex, I mean, I said this on the last podcast, so I'm proud of myself. I think he is one of the most unsung heroes of that team. Second base, it might not be as flashy as shortstop, but he had 8 defensive assists on Monday. And he's a great left-handed bat. He always gives a quality at bat. And I think that he did so well. And Forbes talked about it too. And he tried to get 2 bunts down this weekend. He got one of them down for a hit that was perfectly placed. But Gavin, Colby, and Alex, they really showed up, especially when the Tar Heels needed it.
Yeah, if you're going to win NCAA tournament games, whether it's a regional, a super regional in Omaha, you've got to have everybody across the board that can produce and step up. And you're right, Colby Wilkerson's hit, one of the biggest hits in Boschheimer history. Forbes talked about the loudness of it. He's absolutely right. Madera doing that. Even that, I don't know if I agreed with the bunt there. Probably not. But I understand the rationale because I didn't think they would hold LSU to no runs after that. I thought they needed more than just one to tie and one to win. But just a total team effort, without question, across the board all weekend. We talked about free passes last week. Well, when they were giving out free passes against LSU, they lost. When they weren't, they were able to win 2 games against them. And that goes to, we can talk the starters. Shea Sprague was fantastic over the weekend. DeCaro he gave them what he needed to do on that last game on Monday. And then Aiden Houck probably could have gone a little longer, Forbes talked about. But the bullpen, Matthew Mateus, and especially Dalton Pence. There's been some question about Carolina's closing ability. Matt Poston's had his struggles. We saw that on display on Friday. But Dalton Pence, I said watching the game, I said Dalton Pence is going for North Carolina legendary status here. And he, in fact, closed the deal. Your thoughts on that performance? You've watched him all year, and for the past 2 years. He when they needed it, I don't think I've seen anybody as good as Dalton Pence was right then.
Dalton is, and Forbes will say this every single time Dalton is brought up, Dalton is a horse, like a racehorse. He pitched 117 pitches across that weekend, which is crazy. And I think if Forbes tried to take him out of that last game, he would not have gone willingly. It's not just his pitch ability and his ability to overpower pitchers or hitters with his fastball, and he's working in his cutter a lot more, but just like the mentality that he has on the mound, it's just so much of just a pure competitor. It is a pure one-on-one battle between him and the hitter. And people who say that baseball is boring, you are so wrong. Watching that last at bat between Jared Jones and Dalton Pence, and then Josh Pearson and Dalton Pence in the bottom of the 10th, I think that was one of the most adrenaline times I've ever had, because every single ball that was thrown could change the course of the game, and they fouled it off, and they fouled it off. And Dalton just kept going. He just kept finding more reserve and going after it. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't scared. Forbes actually made a joke after the game that Dalton had told him earlier in the week that Nolan Ryan threw 259 pitches. And he was like, Dalton just, he steps up when they needed it. And on that point, I think Maddie is like that too. He also stepped up in those middle innings. Him and Helmers for LSU, I think they retired like 18 batters in between 3 innings, between the 3 of them. They just went up, down, up, down. And it's not that he's going to strike out a ton of guys, but he just gives very playable balls for his defense. And he also came out and just dealt in a spot that's exactly what you needed. And so he and Dalton especially, they have that bulldog mentality, and it is very much what I would want in my setup man and then my closer, especially in the big game like that. Against Tommy Tanks is a very big name. Jared Jones has hit almost 30 home runs. Josh Pearson had a fantastic weekend. Stephen Milam, with his crazy LSU tiger hair, hit a walk-off in LSU's first game. They are a very, very talented team. And then Dalton went toe-to-toe with Gage Jump in those final innings. So I just think that their performance can be overlooked at all.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the bulldog mentality, and I agree with that. It's sometimes overstated because you always want that with guys, but what I like watching Dalton Pence is he does not nibble. We talked about the walks. How many walks came when they had 1-2 counts and then they tried to nibble? I thought he struck Jared Jones out to end the game there. We were behind home plate. Looked like a strike to me. But then to come back with Pearson, who had hit a bomb early, I guess early on Sunday. We said we'd mess up the days. It is what it is. But to not nibble and then put yourself in a bad situation where you've got multiple guys on base. When LSU had bases loaded on game 2 there, Carolina kept not getting an out and keeping that going. So to do it on Monday night, Pence and Matthias, to your point, great job battling, going straight at guys. Tommy White. I still don't know why people give him grief. He left North Carolina State. He did exactly what everybody in the world would do, especially as a Carolina fan. Made some money, got a national championship, and he caught a ton of grief in Boschheimer this weekend. But when you're looking at the bottom of the 10th inning and you've got White, you've got Milam, who is about 5'6" at best, and then you've got Jones and Pearson, for Pence to get through that, like I said, inserted himself into legendary status in North Carolina baseball lore, and we'll see how it goes. We'll get to the regional here, but let's sort of talk about some of our keys. And I'm talking with Grace Nugent, and of course, we're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Got to get it out there. Runners in scoring positions, situational hitting. It's amazing to me how when they win, they do it well. When they don't win, or when they don't do it well, it makes it much more of a grind than it needs to be. But your thoughts on some of the keys we talked about last week and how they sort of played out and will play out this weekend?
I think last week I started with pitching, which we will definitely talk about at some point, but I think we have to start with runners in scoring position. I said after, I think it was the Sunday loss, I was just talking with some of the other media people, and I was like, if the calling card of this team is offense, the offense is not producing. And you need to produce if you want to win a regional, if you want to go far in the postseason. You need to play your brand of baseball. And they need to do that, you need to hit with runners in scoring position. On Sunday, the hit totals were pretty close, but UNC just couldn't hit with runners in scoring position. You had 2 of your RBI leaders in Casey Cook and Parks Harbor with no RBIs across the entire regional, which is not what you need. You did have that bottom of the order step up, which is awesome, but you need those top of the lineup guys to hit with Gavin's getting on. Madera's getting on. So you need, when the lineup turns over with Vance, with Casey, with Parks, you need to be able to hit. Casey's leading the team in RBIs. I think it's at 76 right now, and he hasn't gotten an RBI since the since the Pitt ACC tournament game, and both of those were home runs. That kid is due for an RBI. He's 8-game hitting streak, needs an RBI. And I think with runners in scoring position on Saturday, especially with 2 outs, they did a lot of things with 2 outs. They were 3 for 11 with 2 out hitting. But in runners in scoring position, they were 2 for 8. Bases loaded, they capitalized a little bit and they won that game. But on Sunday, runners in scoring position, 2 for 10, bases loaded, 1 for 4. That's not a great metric. That's going to lose you a game. They hit really well with 2 outs, but they couldn't really do anything else. And then on Monday, even though they won the game, they were 3 for 13 with runners in scoring position. You need to hit with runners in scoring position. And on some of those, when you look at the top of the lineup too, sometimes, like you said last week, just getting the ball in play, staying alive. And there's a few calls on or strike looking on that top of the lineup that these guys are talented enough with 2 strikes on that 2-strike approach. Just foul off the ball. Just dink it over to the stands. Don't watch a slider or a fastball come right down and get you looking. So I think that The two-strike approach, they need to clean up, especially the top of that order. That is a very talented top of the order. I'm saying all of this in exception with Anthony D'Onofrio because he just has had a great 2 weeks. All tournament team for the ACC tournament, all regional team. I think in those spans, he's hitting like 600, which is when you need your guys to step up. So the other guys need to step up because that bottom of the lineup has proved that they will get on base. So the top of the lineup needs to be able to hit them in, hitting with runners in scoring position. That situational hitting.
Absolutely. The Sunday game where I think they stranded 10 or 11 in the last 3 or 4 innings. I mean, you kind of felt the wind come out of the sails. But then on Monday, the grinding out the win. And that's one thing you do in tournament baseball is you have to figure out a way to grind out a win. A couple sort of tales from the weekend. I was obviously in the crowd there. LSU fans had no worry in the world that they were going to lose that game or lose this series or lose the regional until they actually lost it. They had that much confidence in their guys, and rightfully so. I mean, that's a good ball club. But for North Carolina, leaving the stadium on Sunday after losing that game, a lot of people were nervous. And credit Scott Forbes, credit the coaching staff, and credit the players for staying even keel. They talk about next game process and all that stuff, and it's easy to say, but to actually do it, they got it done against LSU. They sent the defending national champions home. I think it's criminal that LSU was even in that regional, but that's another story. I think it's doubly criminal that LSU was the home team in 2 of the 3 games. That's another story. Everybody knows how I feel about the NCAA. So we're not going down that rabbit hole. But Grace, let's sort of look ahead a little bit to the Super Regional coming up here. West Virginia comes out of the Arizona region. Didn't even have to play Arizona. They've had a decent year. They beat Dallas Baptist and then they beat Grand Canyon twice. But when I look at a West Virginia team, on its face, you think this is a team that's lesser than LSU. This is a team that Carolina should beat. And at home, that's probably accurate. But West Virginia's got some players, and they also have a coach that has been around a long time in Randy Mazey. Played at Clemson, coached at East Carolina. So he's very familiar with North Carolina, very familiar with any sort of rivalry aspect of it. West Virginia people travel. There will be as many West Virginia people down here as there were LSU people. Credit LSU people. Some of them drove 13 to 15 hours to get here. Just massive show up by them. But West Virginia is going to come to play. And West Virginia, I read on their message boards, going to opponent message boards is always an interesting thing. But they were glad when Carolina beat LSU because they did not want to go all the way down to LSU and play the Tigers down there. So they feel like they've gotten some sort of gift. Sort of give us the keys or give us a little bit of a scouting report on this West Virginia Mountaineer team that'll come in here with, I think, very little pressure to do anything against Carolina.
I think that I can attest to West Virginia fans travel whenever Texas would play them in any sport. There would be a lot of blue and yellow supporting the Mountaineers. And I think, especially with West Virginia, they've been counted out. They're a 3 seed. There's a lot of pressure on UNC. A lot of people are expecting, okay, you beat LSU. That is your big test, which I do think that LSU is a better ball club than West Virginia. And just the way the regional is formatted, that is a harder way to win than a super, not because it's 3 other teams, but when you do a super, you get back in the routine. It's just like a weekend series. It's just like a home weekend series for UNC. And they can get back in that routine. But I think with West Virginia, because they've been counted out, they're gritty and they're here to play. And with it being Maisie's swan song, they're going to do whatever. UNC has so much more to lose than West Virginia. This is West Virginia's first super regional in program history. They are going to go and leave it all out on the field, everything. Whereas I can see a little bit more pressure, trepidation with the UNC club, which is why I think that Monday's win for the regional was so good that this team is like, we have to fight tooth and nail. Not that they haven't had to fight the entire season. they have had to fight. But they didn't show that fight as much in those first 3 days of the regional. And then they got the LIU, obviously that was a fight. But they got to the last day and they realized this is do or die. This is do or go home. Go back to their houses, I guess. So I think that this West Virginia team is going to be – they're going to do it all. And I think that UNC may come out a little bit flat to go up against that because they might not have that same kind of no pressure mentality. And this West Virginia team has got some dudes. They have JJ Weatherholt, which is probably a buzz name if you're looking into college baseball a lot. Last year, he was Big 12 Player of the Year. He hit .449. His slugging percentage was .787. 16 homers and 36 steals. He has showed that he can play amazing baseball. He's been out half the year this year with an injury. He's the number 7 MLB prospect for this upcoming draft. He profiles as a second baseman. I believe he's playing shortstop for them. He has a 70 grade hit tool. He can just make some unbelievable plays. Right now, I believe he's batting around .354, which he's just, it's not the JJ Weatherholt from last year, but some of the scouting reports have said that he's a lefty. So that'll be interesting to see him match up with some of the righties. He has power to all fields, and some scouts say that he's the best pure hitter in this draft class. And this is a very stacked draft class. And last year he had a 10% miss rate on balls and just fantastic bat to ball skills. Does he look like the JJ Weatherholt from last year? No. Do I think that he can kick into the JJ Weatherholt from last year? Absolutely. He is going to cause a lot of problems, I believe. And it'll be a very interesting matchup to see. He plays exciting baseball. I think one of the greatest things about college baseball and having other teams come that you wouldn't normally get to play, UNC would not normally get to be playing West Virginia, is you just have this influx of talent. While, yes, LSU was a scary regional opponent, you got to see Jared Jones. You got to see Gage Jump. You got to see Luke Coleman. You got to see Tommy Tanks. Just so much talent. And West Virginia brings talent just like that. They have, and this guy's going to be fun, Derek Clark. He's their ace. He's pitched 4 complete games. He's listed on the roster at 5'9", which means he's probably 5'7". I was talking with a few people, and just like Dalton Pence, they said Bulldog. I mean, this guy has pitched 4 complete games. He pitched a complete game against DBU in the Tucson Regional. 9 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 run, 8 Ks, and he only needed 101 pitches to do it. I think Shea has gotten into the 7th, 8th inning, and it's taken him to 105, 106. And this guy was not going to absolutely overpower you like Chase Burns might with strikeout, strikeout, strikeout. But he has a 4-pitch mix that he pitched on the Cape last summer, and some of the guys that caught him said the 4-pitch mix to catch is just annoying because he just mixes it up so well. And he's a 3/4 slot lefty, which the Tar Heels are not always the best against. And he has one of his best pitches besides his fastball is he has this like sweeping slurve. So it'll be really unique to see how Forbes and Coach Weirs prep their hitters for him, because if anyone is not going down without a fight on that West Virginia team, it is Mr. 4 complete games. It is Mr. probably's been counted out too many times because he's 5'9". So they're going to have their work cut out for them on Friday.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Weatherholt. Like we said, he's been injured this year. He's been dinged up. He only played in 34 games. He struck out 15 times. West Virginia as a team, looking at the stats, they've struck out 513 times, which is more than North Carolina. They have several guys in the 60s, a couple guys in the high 50s. Vance Honeycutt, of course, is in the low 70s strikeouts for Carolina. Weatherholt struck out 15 times. And he leads off normally. And you mentioned playing shortstop. The key there is keep him off the base paths, come out and do not nibble facing him. And then against Clark, you mentioned Clark on Friday. And granted, he's just one guy. And we can see, I mean, you can go back to the LSU series, you can see how guys that were supposed to be really good weren't, and guys that folks hadn't paid much attention to were great. the key is to get to Clark early, at least make him work and stretch out that pitch count. That's one thing. I believe it was heard for LSU that Carolina let get deep into the game with very few pitches, and then you had Sprague, who was loading up on pitches. So I think not necessarily don't strike out or get hits, but extend at bats on Clark and force him to work. And it'll be interesting to see a guy that's not your traditional 6'4", 6'5" power thrower face North Carolina. They have had some trouble with those lefties that are, we'll call it, crafty in the past. Clark is certainly that. Grace, they've also got Reed Chumley, who's their third baseman. He's a fantastic baseball player. They've got a couple other pitchers. Folks always ask me, tell me about the bullpen for teams that Carolina faces. So sort of tell us about what you've seen there.
Well, going back to Chumley quickly, I'm excited. He is a dynamic third baseman. If you want a dynamic third baseman, that is a dynamic third baseman. He's 306 wins above replacement. I'm excited. Gavin has showed when there's another kind of third baseman that he's going to step up and just like compete there defensively. So I'm very excited to see the Chumley Gallaher, who's going to make the more interesting, the better, the cooler throw at third. But going to not just the pen, but the other arms, because this is a 3-game series. Unlike with LSU and LIU and Wofford, you didn't know exactly who you were going to get and when, because it depended on the other teams. But they have their other 2 guys that I'm going to expect to start, is you're probably going to see Switalski on Saturday. He's pitched 60 innings on the year, 54 Ks, around a 5.34 ERA. Again, ERA can be misleading. Thatcher Hurd had a 7.04 ERA, and the Tar Heels didn't really have an answer for that. He also has shown that he can have length. In that GCU game, he went 7.2 innings he only had 4 strikeouts, but again, that's not really the calling card of this West Virginia pitching staff, but he only let 2 runs score in 7 innings. And the Tar Heels this weekend showed that, like you said, they really need to try to stretch out and lengthen, extend at bats so they can get to that bullpen if the starter's giving them trouble. And in their pen, they have Carson Estridge, who pitched twice in the Tucson Regional. I think he's probably going to be one of their go-to guys. They have Hamilton Oliver, Max with 2 X's, Yell, and Joseph Fredericks. Those seem like the guys that they have used the most. They have the most games started, most games appearances. And none of them have really crazy strikeout stuff, but their pitchers have proved they have length. And no one really expected West Virginia to walk out of that Tucson Regional. I don't think a lot of people expected Arizona to walk out of that Tucson Regional anyway. I expected Dallas Baptist to walk out of that Tucson Regional, and I was incorrect. And West Virginia proved me wrong. So they have proved doubters wrong before, and I think that when it comes to their pitching staff, especially led by Clark, they're going to do the same thing.
When you look at West Virginia's roster, it's still tough for me to wrap my head around West Virginia being in the Big 12 and playing Oklahoma and Texas Tech and all that. But you mentioned Switalski played at Gardner-Webb, which North Carolina fans should know who that is. And they've got another kid, Joseph Fredericks, played at Pro 5 Academy, which North Carolina fans should be familiar with. So it's going to be an interesting mix. When you look at West Virginia and how they got here on the season, let's just talk about that briefly. They had some series wins. They won 2 out of 3 at Oklahoma. Oklahoma was the 9 national seed. Of course, they're at home as well. They did that in March. They swept Kansas, and in May, they took out Kansas State, who I believe is playing Virginia in another super regional. So this is a baseball team that has played some quality games. They've played quality opponents throughout the course of the year. Like I said off the top, the 36-22 record doesn't scare you on its face, but when you think about it, LSU and other teams' records are pretty similar. So North Carolina will have their hands full this weekend. The key, as Grace said, and as I've said, is Carolina needs to be locked in and not give anything free. If West Virginia earns it, they do. But you cannot give them free passes. You can't make errors in the field. Interesting, Carolina played relatively clean in the game. Advanced Huntingcutt was the one error that of note. And Grace, when you look at North Carolina's defense against this West Virginia team, They like to play small ball. They like to put you in pressure situations. Overall, Carolina's defense going into here, just before we move to the mailbag, I think this is really, really a key in this game because West Virginia's pitching is better than people expect, but North Carolina's defense needs to be clean all around. So we'll finish this portion where we started earlier. Pitching, no free passes. Defense, no errors. Your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on Luke Stevenson behind the plate? He got pulled out of the game the other night. He was beat up. Just overall, Carolina's defensive side of the ball for this regional.
I think that we'll start with Luke. I think especially, I know the phrase that the freshmen sometimes turn into sophomores, and that is definitely for Luke. He commanded the whole regional, and I thought he did a fantastic job. I think one of the reasons that coach pulled him was just purely from a hitting standpoint, and he hasn't had the best weekend either, but I think his defense behind the plate is awesome. And I think Haskin did such a good job as well. You don't really have a bad option there. And I think Luke is commanding the entire defense fantastically. And I think that kind of how Dalton Pence has evolved on the mound, the defense has evolved together really well. And that's not just because Forbes said it, you have one of the best, you have a fantastic middle infield. And defense is all up, it starts up the middle. Luke, Madera, Wilkerson, Honeycutt, that middle area. And I don't know how many double plays, but I think over the weekend they probably turned 5 to 7 double plays. If that's a combination between Madera and Wilkerson, just Madera, just Wilkerson. But that middle infield, especially with the UNC pitchers that also might not strike out double digits a game, that defense is going to be so necessary. And Gavin, as we've talked about, he has shown that he can be a dynamic third baseman. That snag that he made on Tommy White, he's past the foul line. He makes the throw to Harbor. Harbor's got to stretch and fall over for the ball. Parks Harbor has said to us, there are 8 athletes on the field and then myself. But Parks Harbor, that was a very, very athletic catch. He's evolved there at first. Obviously, when you talk about the outfield, you're going to talk about D'Onofrio and Vance. Dono, his arm is the best outfield arm they have, I believe. And he can definitely scare for a West Virginia team that likes to play small ball. If they hit either a sac fly or some sort of bloop into that right field and he can get it fast enough, he can fully throw out whoever's on the base paths. Vance had an error. That is one error. That is one error for Vance Honeycutt. One error compared to the highest defensive runs saved as an outfielder. I think he's fourth or fifth in defensive runs saved, and the only people ahead of him are catchers and shortstops because they get more opportunities. One error is fine. I know in those big games you got to make it. Vance Honeycutt, that last ball that Josh Pearson hit, he had to run down. Not every center fielder is going to get that and make it look like a routine catch. But that's the luxury of having Vance Honeycutt. And then Casey also maybe did not have the best and most unbelievable weekend in the outfield, but he will run for every ball. Forbes said that he normally has a pretty good jump on balls. So I think that the UNC defense they've only gotten better, and especially that infield is going to have to work over time. They're going to need to be perfect because you can't give anything away in any of these games, especially to this West Virginia team who's going to play scrappy, they're going to play small ball, and they're going to just try to run you down.
Yeah, I'll say it again. I've said it all year. I've said it for 3 years now. People are going to realize how good Vance Honeycutt and now Anthony D'Onofrio are in the outfield next year. And if you don't believe that, then look at other teams' defense. If LSU's left fielder on Saturday and right fielder, who I think was the same guy, I could be wrong, catches a ball, LSU is in the Super Regional, especially on the ball that Johnny Castagnazzi hit there late on Monday night. Defense, outfield defense, elite. We talked about it way back in October, November. Could be elite. They are elite. In the infield defense with Gallaher. the play there where he snagged it and threw across and Harbor fell towards the dugout to catch, that was a great one. The rocket that Tommy White hit on Sunday night that spun him around and still got him, that was an even better play. Folks do not realize, if you want to realize how tough third base is in baseball, especially college baseball when they're hitting with basically loaded aluminum bats or composite bats, go sit down the third base line and see the rockets that are hit that way, and Gallaher scoop them up. They need to continue it. North Carolina's pitching. So keys to the game, just so we're clear, real quick. No free passes, link from the starters, clean in the field, situational hitting. Anything left for Super Regional before we get to the mailbag?
I think that also just the mental aspect of it. Don't come out flat. They kind of came out flat in the regional. You cannot do that. And by the end, they were all looking like Mr. Dalton Pence up there on the mound. Like, we got to win this. And I think that they need to come out with that mentality. And that is a credit to the coaching staff for getting them ready for that last game and saying, you are going to fight for every single thing. You are going to fight for 30 outs. And they need to bring that to West Virginia. Even if that's absolutely, if they're down and that's fighting back, if they're already up and that's just fighting to keep going, whatever it is, they need to bring that mental aspect with them and just try to dominate, play their brand of baseball. Because sometimes this weekend, it didn't look like the team that went to Wake and swept there. It didn't look like the team who dropped one to Duke and then came back to win a series on the road. And that's the team they need to look like.
Yep. Every championship run, you have to grind out something and win something you probably shouldn't have. North Carolina certainly accomplished that. Mailbag questions. And before I do that, let me talk about Johnny T-Shirt. This is the fun portion of the show, Grace. Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com on East Franklin Street for all your Carolina gears. Everything you need. They've got the jerseys. Personally, I think my favorite jersey now that North Carolina wears is the short sleeve quarter ones that say Carolina, and it's just straight Carolina blue.
I agree.
They look strong in those. If you've watched these shows before, you know which ones I do not like to see, and I do not think we will see them this weekend. So appreciate Coach Forbes and the guys taking my advice there, mothballing those. But Johnny T-Shirt's got everything you need Carolina related. Get by there. If you're in town for their Super Regional, go buy a Johnny T-Shirt, visit them, tell them you're an Inside Carolina person. They'll give you 10% off your everyday order if you're a premium member. And if you can't get up here and you want some gear and you want those sweet jerseys, get them online at Johnny T-Shirt. Also, Congruity for your small business needs. Go do this if you're a small business owner. CongruityHR.com/Tar Heels. Go there, fill out your assessment. You'll get local homegrown help growing your small business from Darren and Matt. They've managed to grow theirs to be a big deal. They can help you with all that. So CongruityHR/Tar Heels, or excuse me, CongruityHR.com/Tar Heels, and they'll help you out there. Mailbag questions. I'm going to let you pick which question we take first. There's a couple questions on there that we can't answer because just don't know yet. I will say the home and away fiasco that Prim asked about. It's the dumbest thing the NCAA does. NCAA preaches it as a, I want your opinion here because this is old man yelling at clouds. They preach fairness. The NCAA, of all people, preach fairness, and they find a way to exhibit that fairness by allowing a situation where the team that played all season to host and be a national seed is the away team for 2 games in basically a 3-game series against a 2 seed. Ridiculous. But Prim, if you want to know the answer, talk to the NCAA. It'll be the same way this weekend. Carolina home for game 1, away for game 2, home for game 3. Grace, what do you think about that rule?
I think that's stupid. That's part of the reason for wanting to host, to be a national seed. Not only do you get to sleep in your own bed, be at your own fields, whatever, you also get to be the home team. It's in the name. Home dugout, home team, home field advantage. Maybe you should be the home team. And I get that they're like, but in the name of fairness. But why? Games are not fair. That's why you play. It's all a competition. I think that I'm not going to say that that is the reason for any loss, any win, anything like that. But I will say I do think that's part of the perk of hosting is you get to be the home team. The other team is coming to your home to play. You should be the home team. But
Yeah.
if we keep talking about this, I think we will go on forever on that topic. So that is my opinion.
It is West Virginia's got to come here. They'll be sleeping in a hotel or whatever. Their fans will be all over the place. And then they'll get to call themselves the home team on Saturday. We shall see how it works out. Pitching, we'll certainly hear more. Just for folks watching this, I guess today's Wednesday. Tomorrow there's a media availability, so we may hear more about the pitching rotation. But I think they stay the same. I think you roll, assuming DeCaro's straight, and he should be. Forbes has talked about 4 and 5 days rest all the time. That would be the one question. But I think you roll DeCaro, Sprague, and a staff day with Aiden Hout starting it up on Sunday if necessary. What do you think?
I think that recipe has worked. And I think you do that. I don't see any problem with that. I think that is the way you go. And Jason has, for his credit, although people might say those are not his best starts. No, they were not his best starts. But for his credit, I know he will probably not like that everyone always attaches freshman to his name, that he's very young. But for his credit, they put him in 2 very stressful scenarios. We're going to let you open a regional. You have to open the elimination game for said regional again later. It's one thing when you do it with Brandon Schaefer and he's a junior. It's another thing when you're doing it with a guy that's really young. But I think he showed some great mental fortitude and just some great maturity to go in there and do that. And I think he'll be more comfortable because this feels like a weekend home series for him. And I think the coaches are going to try to do that. Be like, this is very important, but you go out and you deal like you've done. You've started on Friday at home. You're going to go do that again. And then I think Shea, same thing. You've done this before. And that can be the game that ends it. And I think Shea has shown when he was in that Sunday spot, I know people will say, well, Friday's the pressure guy. He's got to set the tone. Yeah, but Sunday is sweep. Sunday is avoid getting swept, or Sunday is take the series. And that's virtually what this Saturday is. And I think Shea is the perfect guy to be there. And I think Aiden still has, I don't think that was his best start. I think he has gas left in the tank. I think he can definitely do it on Sunday if they need him to. And if for some reason that Saturday game is really tight and you need another bullpen arm, I could see them bringing Aiden in for an inning there just to clinch the super. But I think Scott will do the same thing, and I think there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I love the point you made about Sprague on the decider game. Friday's great. You want to win Friday, but Sprague has been in that role where I have to produce to either save their rear ends on a sweep, like you mentioned, win the series, or finish the sweep. And those games are just as pressure-packed as game one, I think. And I think Sprague's been fantastic. I mean, that's one guy who I was a little leery of, knew he could pitch, but stepping up from Elon to North Carolina, he's been everything you could ask for from a transfer, as has really all the transfers that have produced from North Carolina. We've talked about them over and over and over. Let's see if I can find another question. Ray Ram asks, how much time will Carolina staff spend analyzing West Virginia's tendencies, pitching, defense, and hitting? Is ready-made analysis available at college level, and what kind of pitches and all that stuff? So, and Grace, you can expound on this, but the analytics and the preparation in college baseball has gotten off the charts. I mean, it is unbelievable the amount of work they do. Teams have pitching machines now that you can put in anybody's numbers, and while you don't see the arm slot, you don't see all that, you get exactly what you're going to get out of a pitcher's arms. So Carolina is at the leading edge of all that stuff. They have a fantastic analytical team that does all the work, as do most college programs. Don't want to make it Carolina specific, but there's no stone left unturned when preparing for teams. Sometimes I think it's too much. Sometimes baseball is you just go with your gut, and I've asked Forbes that, and we've asked him. He's all about analytics, but he's also about I've been coaching forever. We see how it worked out Monday night when you had Gavin Gallaher at first base and Parker Haskins catching and Castagnazzi coming in and out and all. So, your thoughts on Carolina's preparation as we close this one out?
I think they'll spend more time than they did for the regional, just partly because they know who they're playing and they've seen them in a tournament style before, just with their stuff from last weekend. I think that they'll use the iPitch machine, which is what I'll just plug in. You can plug in Zach Allen to the iPitch machine. I don't think anyone's going to get a hit. Forbes has said that before, but you can plug them in. I think that the hardest thing when you look at this West Virginia pitching staff is that Clark is not your typical pitcher. It's not really what you've seen. The entire UNC pitching staff is over 6 feet tall. They're not going to have really seen a ton of guys like Clark. They just went up against Hurd, Jump, and Holman, Helmers. All of those are some pretty tall dudes. So I think especially with his arm slot and his kind of crafty lefty style, that's going to be harder to replicate. But I know that they'll have the analytics team put in pitch reports. They'll look for tendencies. They will do their due diligence. But at the end of the day, if it's coming down to a decision over the numbers or the gut feeling from Scott Forbes, Forbes is going to go with the gut feeling. And like you said, that's what happens when you're a head coach, when you've been pitching, when you've been a pitching coach, and a coach like he is now. He's been around the game for so long. He knows what he thinks is best for his players. And he knows his players way more than any number is going to say. So I think that they're going to do their due diligence and they will try to come out and set the tone on Friday.
That is it. That is Grace Nugent. Like I said, if you're watching this on Wednesday, on Thursday, Carolina has some media availability. Grace will be there as well as the rest of the Inside Carolina team covering that. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina for all your coverage. The best coverage out there for Carolina-specific baseball coverage coming up. North Carolina, West Virginia, 6 o'clock Friday, 6 p.m. Friday, 8 p.m. Saturday, and then 3 p.m. Sunday if necessary in Boschheimer Stadium. If you can't get tickets straight out, then get on the Inside Carolina message boards. There's always people selling them, but make sure you get there in Boschheimer. Forbes talked about the Bosch Magic on Monday night, and if you weren't there, you missed it. And if you had the opportunity to go, you missed it. Maybe it'll be repeated this weekend. We shall see. Grace, as always, I appreciate it.
Thank you.